Hi everybody, welcome to code-shayk. This time we'll be creating some patterns. Before we move to patterns, in case you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and stay tuned to more videos on Java. Let's first understand the printing scenarios. We have system.out.println. So what it does, it prints the content and switches on to the next line. Then we have system.out.print. It only prints the content without switching on to the next line. In the first case, if we want to print 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 in individual statements but in a single line, we may write as save it. We can see here 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 have been printed in a single line. In our second case, we shall print 1 to 5 in individual statements but each in a new line. Save, run. So we can see that 1 to 5 have been printed individually and each have been printed in a new line. So if we want to just enter into a new line, we'd require to run system.out.println without passing any value inside the bracket. We do not pass any value. We can see here a new line has been inserted after 1. Now let's look at a first pattern. In the first line we have 1 to 5, then 1 to 4, then 1 to 3, 1 to 2 and 1 to 1. Let's start by printing 1 to 5 in a single line. Save it and run. We see here 1 to 5 have been printed in a single line. But we have repeating statements. We have this system.out.print being repeated 5 times and the value is ranging from 1 to 5. So we'll put this system.out.print in a for loop where the value will range from 1 to 5. We can clearly see the value have been printed from 1 to 5. So we run a j loop from 1 to 5 and we print the value of j. So for the first iteration, the value of j will be 1 and for the last iteration, the value of j will be 5. So if we want to print the second line, we'll run the j loop from 1 to 4. So we'll just change the condition j is less than equals to 4. For the third line, j is less than equals to 3. Then fourth, j is less than equals to 2. And for the last line, j is less than equals to 1. So we can see here, this code snippet is being repeated and the value is changing from 5 to 1. So we'll put this in another loop and we'll change the value from 5 to 1. So let's declare another for loop. So we have taken an I loop which is ranging from 5 to 1 and we are decrementing the value. So once the value of 5 becomes 0, it comes out of the loop. Notice here while decrementing, the condition should be greater than or equal to 1 and we'll put this for loop inside this. And the part which is changing, we'll replace it with the variable I and the variable I will be ranging from 5 to 1. So for the first iteration of I will be 5 and the j loop will run from 1 to 5. For the second iteration, I will become 4 and this value I will be replaced here with 4. So j loop will run from 1 to 4, then 1 to 3, 1 to 2 and then 1 to 1. We save and run. We can see here our pattern has been printed but in a single line. So after the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have been printed, we'll enter into a next line. We run it again. We can see here our pattern has been printed. So basically we have two loops. One is the j loop and one is the I loop. J loop is responsible for printing the values inside each line and I loop will control the number of the lines. Now let's look at our second pattern. In a second pattern, we have 5 times, 4 printed 4 times, 3 printed 3 times, 2 printed 2 times and 1 printed 1 time. So we'll just change the value of j to I here. So what is happening when I loop runs for the first time, the value of I is 5 and j runs from 1 to 5. Inside the first iteration, the value of I is 5 and j loop runs for 5 times and it prints the value of 5 times. Second, the value of I becomes 4. J loop will run from 1 to 4 but it will not print the value of j, it will print the value of I which is 4. So 4 will be printed 4 times. Similarly 3 times, 2 times and for the last iteration I will be 1. It will run from 1 to 1 and it will print the value of I which is 1 time. So for printing patterns, we'll have to decide the values of j, the values of I, and what we are printing in the system.out.print, whether it is I or j. So if the values are changing in a line, we'll be printing the value of j, which is the inner loop. And if the values are same in a single line, like five times, then we print the value of I, which will be constant in each j loop. So let's look at a third pattern. Our third pattern we see here, the j loop will be responsible for printing each line. So we can see here, for the first iteration, j loop will run from 1 to 1. For the second iteration, j loop will run from 1 to 2. Third iteration 1 to 3. Fourth iteration 1 to 4. Fifth iteration 1 to 5. So we can deduce it that j loop is running from 1 to I, where I will be ranging from 1 to 5. And since the values are changing in a single line, so we'll print the value of j. So j loop will run from 1 to I, and the value of I will be from 1 to 5. So I is less than equals to 5, I plus plus, and we'll print the value of j. So that's our third pattern. The fourth pattern is similar to the third pattern, where instead of printing j, we'll be printing I. Let's look at our next pattern. In our next pattern, we can see we are printing star. So for j loop, we have one iteration. In the second line, we have two iteration. Similarly, for third, we have three iteration, four iteration, and then five iteration. So we can have j loop from 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, and 1 to 5. J should be from 1 to I. In the first case, we have I as 1, and in the last iteration of j, we have I 5. So I loop will run from 1 to 5, and there we have a pattern. Then in the next pattern, we have the reverse of this. So in the first line, we are printing star 5 times. So j will be from 1 to 5. So j loop will run 5 times and it will print 5 times. So the first value of I will be 5 and the last value of I will be 1. So I should be greater than equals to 1. We'll decrement the value of I. There we have our last pattern. So that concludes our first video on simple patterns. Stay tuned for more videos on patterns and Java programming. Thank you.